In a distant galaxy, on a planet light years away from Earth, there existed a world where various alien species lived in peace and harmony. It was a world of strange creatures and magnificent landscapes, where every being had its own place and purpose. However, for one alien girl, her existence was a curse. Her name was Zira, and she was born with glowing purple skin, which made her stand out from everyone else. Her skin shimmered in the light, casting a beautiful yet eerie glow wherever she went. Her eyes, deep and mysterious, could pierce through the darkest of nights. From the moment Zira had been born, the whispers of others followed her everywhere. "Stay away from her. She's dangerous," they would say. It wasn't just her appearance that frightened the others, but also the rumors that had been passed down from generation to generation. People believed that her kind had a violent nature, that her race was one to be feared, and that their power was dangerous. And so Zira grew up with these constant fears surrounding her, not because she had done anything wrong, but because of the way she looked and what people had assumed about her. Zira spent her childhood in isolation, away from the other children. While they played together in the bright fields, she was locked away in the shadows, hidden from the world. The few times she did try to approach others, the looks of horror and disgust were all she ever received. She could hear their whispers and feel their eyes on her, as if she was something to be feared. The constant rejection made her feel like an outsider, like a monster who didn't belong. As she grew older, she learned to accept her fate. She stopped trying to fit in and embraced the loneliness that had been her only companion. She found comfort in the quiet, in the solitude that the world had forced upon her. But despite the rejection, she held on to a small hope, a faint hope that one day someone would look past her skin, past the assumptions, and see the real her. She longed for someone who could see the soul beneath the surface, who could understand that she was more than just an appearance. But as the years passed, that hope seemed to fade with each passing day, leaving behind only the painful reality of being alone. One evening, as Zira wandered through the forest outside her village, she heard something different. It wasn't the usual whispers or the distant cries of rejection. It was a voice, a human voice. She froze for a moment, unsure of what to do. Humans were rare on her planet. They were explorers, travelers who came from faraway stars. They were often seen as outsiders, much like Zira herself, but their presence was always welcomed by the people. Unlike her, she had always heard stories of the humans, tales of their bravery and curiosity, but she had never imagined she would encounter one herself. The man appeared from the shadows of the trees, his figure tall and strong. He wore a dark suit, the kind Zira had seen the humans wear during their expeditions, a suit designed to protect them from the alien environment. His face was kind, and for the first time in her life, Zira saw someone who wasn't recoiling from her. He wasn't running away in fear or looking at her with disgust. Instead, he was staring at her with curiosity and wonder, his eyes filled with something Zira couldn't quite understand. "Are you lost?" the man asked, his voice gentle, yet filled with a strange warmth. Zira opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. She wasn't used to speaking to anyone, especially not someone who was so unafraid of her. She shook her head slowly, unsure of what to say. The man, noticing her hesitation, smiled warmly. "You're not like the others, are you?" he said softly, his gaze never wavering. "I can tell." Zira's heart skipped a beat. No one had ever said anything like that to her before. They always looked at her as if she were a threat, something to be avoided at all costs. But this human, he didn't seem afraid. Instead, he seemed curious. She stepped back cautiously, still unsure of his intentions. "You shouldn't be here," she muttered, her voice low. "I'm dangerous." The man raised an eyebrow, his expression softening. "Dangerous? I don't think so," he replied, taking a step closer. "I think you're just misunderstood." Zira looked at him in confusion. "Misunderstood?" she echoed, the word foreign on her lips. She had never heard anyone speak of her that way. Everyone else thought she was a danger to their world, that her very existence was a threat. No one understands me. No one ever has. The man took another step closer, his eyes filled with understanding. I think I might. I've spent enough time in places like this to know that sometimes the ones who seem the most dangerous are the ones who are actually the most hurt. Zira stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. His words struck something deep within her, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Hope. Could it be possible that someone could see her as more than just her skin? More than just the rumors surrounding her? Could this human truly understand her? For a long moment they stood there in silence, the only sound the distant rustling of leaves in the wind. Zira couldn't bring herself to speak, but the man's calm presence made her feel something she hadn't felt in years. He wasn't afraid of her. In fact, he seemed almost comforted by her presence. You don't need to hide from me, he said gently. I see you. I see the heart beneath that skin. And in that moment, something inside Zira shifted. For the first time in her life, she felt seen, not feared, not judged, but understood. This human, this stranger, had done something no one else had ever done. He had looked past her skin and had seen the real her, and for the first time in years, Zira allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was more to her than the world had ever given her credit for. The road ahead was still uncertain, and there were many obstacles to face. But in that moment, as the human stood before her, something had changed. A new hope had begun to take root in Zira's heart. A hope that maybe, just maybe, she could finally find acceptance and love in a world that had always feared her. As the days passed, Zira found herself thinking more and more about the human who had seen her for who she truly was. His words, "I see the heart beneath that skin," echoed in her mind, reverberating through her thoughts like a gentle, soothing melody. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in her world. For the first time in her life, she felt understood, not as a monster or a threat, but as a person, with a heart capable of kindness, love, and emotion. The human, whose name was Ethan, returned to the forest day after day. Each time he sought her out with no fear or hesitation. He didn't bring weapons or tools like the others. Instead, he brought kindness. And with that kindness came a sense of comfort that Zira had never known. Slowly, she began to trust him, something she had never done with anyone before. One afternoon, as the sun began to dip low, casting a warm golden glow across the trees, Ethan sat beside her near a small, quiet stream. The world around them was still, peaceful, just the sound of water flowing gently over rocks and the soft rustling of leaves. Zira's purple skin, which had once seemed so alien and out of place, now blended harmoniously with the colors of the natural world. She no longer felt as though she was something to be feared. Here, in this moment, she was just another living being, sharing the earth with another. For a long time they sat in silence, the tension of their previous interactions fading away. Zira wasn't used to silence being comforting, but with Ethan, it was different. It felt safe. Eventually, Ethan spoke, breaking the quiet. "You're not what they say you are," he said, his voice soft yet full of conviction. "I can see it in your eyes. I've spent a lot of time traveling, meeting all kinds of beings from different worlds, but I've never met anyone quite like you. You're not dangerous, you're just alone." Zira looked at him, startled by his words. No one had ever described her like that before. No one had ever seen her loneliness. They had only seen her as a threat. She opened her mouth to say something, but her voice caught in her throat. For the first time in a long while, she felt vulnerable. The words she had been hiding for so long suddenly rushed to the surface. "I never asked for this," she whispered. "I didn't choose to be different. I didn't choose to be feared. All I've ever wanted is to belong. But no matter where I go, people see me and they run. They don't look at my heart. They only see my skin, my appearance, my difference." Ethan leaned forward, his expression gentle. "I understand, I really do. People are quick to judge what they don't understand. But that doesn't mean you're wrong. It just means that you haven't found the right people yet. And I think, maybe, we can help each other find those people. Zira's heart fluttered. Could it be true? Could someone actually want to help her? She had always thought she was destined to live in the shadows, away from others, locked in her loneliness. But now, with Ethan's words, a flicker of hope began to form in her chest. Maybe she wasn't as alone as she had always believed. As they continued to talk, Zira learned more about Ethan and his world. He wasn't like the others from her planet. His people, humans, were known for their exploration of other worlds, for their curiosity and compassion. Ethan shared stories of the places he had visited, the people he had met, and the lessons he had learned along the way. He spoke of a world where kindness wasn't just an exception. It was the rule. Where differences weren't something to fear, but something to celebrate. "You're not alone, Zira," Ethan said, his voice filled with warmth. "You're different, yes, but that doesn't make you any less worthy of love and respect. It just means you have a unique perspective, something the world needs." Zira's heart swelled as she listened to him. It was the first time in her life that someone had spoken to her in such a way. It was the first time someone had recognized the value in her difference, instead of condemning it. And for the first time in what felt like forever, Zira allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could find her place in the world. Over the next few weeks, their bond grew stronger. They met in the forest nearly every day, and with each passing moment, Zira's trust in Ethan deepened. She began to open up to him, sharing pieces of herself that she had kept hidden for so long. She told him about the loneliness she had carried, the fear of rejection, and the constant pain of being seen as a monster. Ethan listened without judgment, his eyes always focused on her with kindness and understanding. Their conversations were not always about her pain, though. They talked about everything: the stars above, the beauty of the world, the simple joys of life. Ethan taught her about the human world, its music, its art, its history, and Zira shared stories of her own people, of their culture and traditions. Slowly, they built a bridge between their worlds, connecting in ways neither of them could have expected. Zira began to realize that Ethan wasn't just showing her kindness out of pity. He genuinely cared about her, and that made all the difference. He wasn't trying to change her or make her fit into some mold. He was simply accepting her as she was, seeing her for her heart, not her appearance. But as their bond grew, so did the dangers. Zira knew that the world around them would never understand their connection. They would always see her as a threat. And by being with her, Ethan risked everything: his safety, his reputation, and even his life. But even so, he never wavered. His loyalty to her was unwavering, and as time went on, Zira began to believe in herself more than she ever had before. With Ethan by her side, maybe, just maybe, she could face the world that had always rejected her. And so their connection deepened, and with each passing day, the world seemed a little less lonely, a little less dangerous. Together they began to challenge the judgments of others, to prove that the heart beneath the skin was all that truly mattered. As the days turned into weeks, Zira and Ethan's bond deepened, and the connection between them grew stronger. For the first time in her life, Zira felt as though she was no longer invisible, no longer a mere shadow in a world that feared her. She had found someone who saw her for who she truly was, a person with a heart capable of love, compassion, and vulnerability. Ethan was her rock, her constant companion in a world that had always rejected her. But even as their bond flourished, a dark cloud hung over them. Zira could feel it, a constant pressure building with every passing day. She knew that the world around them would never accept their relationship, never accept someone like her. She had seen the fear in their eyes, heard the whispers of rejection and hatred. No matter how much Ethan defended her, no matter how much he spoke of her true heart, there was no escaping the judgment of society. Zira's fears became a harsh reality when one evening, as they were walking along the edge of the forest, they were confronted by a group of people. They had been watching from a distance, waiting for the right moment to strike. Zira could feel the tension in the air before she even saw them, the way the atmosphere seemed to shift, the way the birds stopped singing, as if the world itself was holding its breath. The group approached them slowly, their faces filled with anger and distrust. There were men and women, their eyes narrowed, their hands clenched into fists. Zira recognized some of them. They were the same people who had whispered behind her back, the same ones who had called her a monster, a danger to their world. But now they were standing before her, their hatred more visible than ever. "You're still here?" one of the men sneered. "We told you to stay away, to leave our world. You don't belong here." Ethan stepped forward, his jaw set in determination. "She belongs here as much as any of you," he said, his voice strong and unwavering. "You don't get to decide who belongs and who doesn't." But the man wasn't backing down. "She's a danger to all of us. Look at her, look at that skin. She's not like us, she's different, and that makes her dangerous." Zira could feel her heart race, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wanted to say something, to defend herself, but the words seemed to get stuck in her throat. She had heard it all before, the accusations, the insults. They had never been this bold, though, never so openly hostile. She glanced at Ethan, her eyes pleading for him to understand, but he just nodded, his expression steady. He was ready to fight for her, ready to stand against the world that wanted to tear them apart. But Zira knew that this wasn't a fight. They could win with words. It wasn't just about her. It was about the fear that had been instilled in these people, the fear that they had carried for so long. Fear of the unknown, fear of what was different. And no matter how much Ethan argued, no matter how much he spoke of her heart, the fear was too strong. It was a force they couldn't fight with reason alone. "We don't care about your words, human," one of the women said, her voice dripping with disdain. "We've made our decision. She needs to leave. Now." Zira's chest tightened. She could feel the weight of their judgment, the weight of their rejection pressing down on her. She had always known that this day might come, but she had hoped, foolishly perhaps, that it wouldn't. She had believed that with Ethan by her side, maybe the world could change. Maybe they could break through the walls of hatred and fear that surrounded her. But now, standing before her, these people weren't willing to see her for who she truly was. They couldn't see beyond her skin, beyond the differences that separated them. "I won't go," Zira said, her voice barely above a whisper. But there was a strength in her words, a defiance that surprised even her. The group of people paused, their expressions faltering for a moment, but it didn't last. The man who had spoken earlier took a step forward, his face twisted with rage. "You will go," he said, his tone cold and final. "If you don't leave now, we'll make you leave, and we won't be gentle about it." Zira's heart sank. She knew that they weren't bluffing. They were prepared to do whatever it took to force her out. The fear in their eyes was real, and it was stronger than any kindness or compassion Ethan could offer. Ethan's hand shot out, grabbing her arm gently. "We don't have to do this. We can leave," he said, his voice soft but firm. "We don't need to fight them." Zira shook her head, her eyes filled with determination. "I'm not going anywhere. I've been running all my life. I've been hiding. I've been accepting their fear. But not anymore. I'm not running anymore, Ethan. I have the right to be here. And so do you." The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of everything she had been carrying. She had been afraid her whole life, afraid of rejection, afraid of being judged, afraid of never belonging. But now, in this moment, she realized that the fear had to stop. She wasn't going to run from who she was, not anymore. She wasn't going to hide from the world just because it was scared of her. Ethan's grip tightened around her arm and he nodded, his eyes filled with admiration and support. "You're right. We're staying." The group of people shifted uneasily, clearly taken aback by their defiance. The tension in the air was thick, and for a long moment, no one spoke. The silence was broken only by the sound of Zira's breath, steady and strong. She could feel her heart racing, but this time it wasn't out of fear. It was out of resolve. She wasn't going to let them push her around anymore. She wasn't going to let anyone define her. She had found her voice, and she was ready to fight for it. But the fight was far from over. The world they lived in wasn't ready to accept her. And the road ahead would be filled with challenges, obstacles, and enemies. But for the first time, Zira felt ready to face them. With Ethan by her side, she knew she could overcome anything. The confrontation had been inevitable. Zira knew that standing her ground would come at a great cost, but she had never expected it to feel so heavy. The world around her seemed to close in, the people who once feared her now standing as obstacles she had to face. The threat of rejection, of violence, loomed over her like a dark cloud. Yet with Ethan by her side, she felt stronger than ever before. The angry mob, their faces twisted with hatred and fear, surrounded them. The words they spat were venomous and the tension in the air was suffocating. Zira could feel her heartbeat pounding in her ears, the fear creeping back into her mind. But she refused to let it take hold. She had fought her entire life to hide from the world, to shrink into the shadows, but not anymore. This time she would face it head-on. Ethan stepped forward, his voice calm yet unwavering, a beacon of hope amidst the storm. "You're wrong," he said, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "She's not dangerous. She's just different. And that doesn't make her any less worthy of respect or compassion." But the crowd wasn't listening. They were consumed by their fear, by their ingrained hatred of the unknown. They couldn't see beyond Zira's alien skin, couldn't see the kindness in her heart or the courage that had kept her alive in a world that rejected her. No matter how much Ethan tried to reason with them, they remained unmoved. Their fear was too deep, their hatred too strong. Zira's heart sank. She had hoped that the world could change, that they could change. But as the mob closed in, their jeers and insults growing louder, she realized that they were fighting an uphill battle. They would never be able to make everyone see the truth. In that moment of despair, something inside Zira shifted. She had always been afraid. Afraid of the world, afraid of rejection, afraid of standing out. But now, as she stood beside Ethan, she realized that fear was no longer an option. She had a choice: to stand back and let the world dictate her fate, or to rise up and fight for what she knew was right. "I won't back down," Zira said, her voice firm and clear. The crowd fell silent at her words. "I won't run anymore. You can't make me disappear just because I look different. I am here, and I have just as much a right to be here as any of you." Her words, though quiet at first, carried with them a strength that resonated deep within her. The anger that had been building inside her for years, the frustration of being misunderstood, the pain of rejection, it all boiled to the surface in that moment. Zira wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for anyone who had ever been judged, for anyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. Ethan's hand rested gently on her shoulder, a silent show of support. He had always believed in her, even when she had doubted herself. And now, as Zira faced the crowd, she realized that their fight wasn't just about them. It was about proving that kindness, understanding, and acceptance could triumph over fear and hatred. The crowd seemed to hesitate for a moment. They had expected her to cower, to beg for forgiveness, to apologize for her very existence. But Zira didn't apologize. She didn't need to. She had done nothing wrong. She was just different. And that was something no one had the right to condemn her for. As the silence stretched on, something incredible began to happen. The hardened expressions of the crowd softened, just a little. The jeers and insults began to fade, replaced by uncertain murmurs. Zira could see it in their eyes. The faintest glimmer of doubt. They were starting to question everything they had been taught, everything they had been told about her. And in that moment, Zira realized that change, though slow, had already begun. Ethan took a step forward, his voice steady and resolute. "You've been taught to fear what you don't understand," he said, his words carrying a weight of truth. "But fear doesn't make someone dangerous. It just makes you blind to who they really are. Zira is not your enemy. She's a person, just like any of you. And she deserves the same kindness, the same respect that you would give to anyone else." For the first time, Zira saw something in the crowd that she had never seen before. Hesitation. The mob was no longer so sure of themselves, no longer so certain that their fear was justified. Zira could feel the shift, the breaking down of the walls they had built around themselves. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her hope, and then something unexpected happened. One of the women in the crowd, a mother with a child in her arms, stepped forward. Her face was filled with uncertainty, but there was something in her eyes, something that mirrored Zira's own longing for acceptance. She looked at Zira, her gaze softening. Maybe you're right, she said, her voice shaky but sincere. Maybe I've been wrong about you. The words seemed to hang in the air, a spark of change flickering in the midst of the tension. Slowly, one by one, others began to speak up. She doesn't deserve to be treated like this, another man said, his voice tentative but firm. We've been living in fear of something we don't understand. The crowd began to disperse, the anger fading as understanding began to take root. Zira stood there stunned. She had expected violence, rejection, and fear, but what she got was something she had never imagined. Acceptance. Ethan smiled at her, his eyes filled with pride. You did it, he said softly. You showed them who you really are. Zira looked around, her heart swelling with a mix of emotions. She had never imagined that the world could change so quickly, that people who had once rejected her could see her for the person she truly was. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy, but it was a start. The walls of fear that had surrounded her for so long were beginning to crumble. As the crowd slowly dispersed, Zira and Ethan stood side by side, looking out at the horizon. They had faced the challenge together, and they had emerged victorious. The road ahead would be long, and there would still be obstacles to face. But for the first time, Zira felt a sense of peace. She had fought for herself, for her right to be seen, and she had won. Together, they had proven that love, understanding, and compassion could overcome even the deepest fears. And with that knowledge, Zira knew that no matter what came next, she would never have to face it alone.